As you can see, you're here to listen to the amazing talk, How to Win Over Executives and Hack the Board with Alyssa Miller. A couple quick housekeeping things before we begin. Number one, all our sponsors are important, but we definitely want to take a moment to thank our diamond sponsors, LastPass and Palo, and also some of our gold sponsors, Google, Intel, Blue Cat. Sponsors kind of help keep us running just as much as you, the attendees, do. Number one, please silence your cell phones. We all have cell phones and we don't want to hear yours for the next hour, so check right now. Just make sure they're on vibrate or quiet. Reiterate, no photography or video unless all of the people in the picture or the video consent. All of the talks are being streamed. They're all going to be recorded. You don't have to, hold stuff up. That's about it. At the end, Alyssa will be taking some questions. Anybody who wants to ask a question, just come up to the mic, ask a reasonable question, and then sit down and Alyssa will give a reasonable answer. With that, I'll get out of your way and let's enjoy the talk.
Wow. Well, hello, B-Sides. Here we are again. It's been 3 years, I think, since I've been here, so this is, in person, right? Because it's been like 3 years since any of us have been here in person for this event. I once gave a talk in an airplane hangar. I think it was quieter there. I'm glad because it's keeping us safe. We've got the air purifiers. This is wonderful, but wow. So I'm excited to be here. Really excited to see all your faces. And you know what? Let's just dive right into this thing. So we're talking about talking to the board, which I know for a lot of people, maybe we don't get that opportunity. So even if you're not speaking to boards, I'm going to try to make this applicable because these concepts apply anytime you're talking cybersecurity to someone who maybe isn't all there on the cybersecurity side of things, which makes up the vast majority of people that we're trying to talk to in most of our jobs. So I figure that kind of fits. So yeah, a little bit about me first of all. That's me. Did you figure that out? I don't know. First and foremost, I'm a hacker and a researcher. I'm a lifelong hacker. If you look at my bio, it says it every time. I was that kid who took my toys apart. At 12 years old, I went out, got a paper route, saved up a bunch of money, went to Best Buy, and I bought a computer. And a couple months later, I hacked into this thing that some of you might remember called Prodigy. Okay, I saw a few heads nodding. I'm not that old yet. Good. Been through a long career, but at this point now, I am the Chief Information Security Officer for a company called Epic Global. That is not the healthcare company. That is not the gaming company. We actually do legal services and some cybersecurity work too. Author and a blogger. I just finally, over COVID, finished my first book, Cybersecurity Career Guide. Thank God that's done. That is a hell of a process. I don't want to do another one anytime soon. Let me just put it that way. And the reason I'm here talking on this particular topic, I've been in leadership for 16 years. Cybersecurity leadership, I go way back to when I was leading a penetration testing and vulnerability management program for a financial services company. I went through years in consulting work and working for a reseller and for a product company. But, in that time, I had the opportunity to speak to a lot of boards. And in fact, my previous role before I joined Epic Global, I had responsibility for reporting into 8 separate boards. Now, that sounds ridiculous, but when you understand that regulators, when you're in a highly regulated industry, they like to appoint their own advisory boards, and so you end up talking to them a lot too. So think about what that does. Now, before I got into that role, I'd been a consultant, so I was used to going into the boardroom and having those conversations, going to ELT meetings, executive leadership team meetings, and talking to executive leaders and explaining to them, what was going on in their organizations and things that they needed to be aware of. And so, but it was when I got to this particular role, I used to work at S&P Global. And, I walked into my first board meeting, and it was still a little daunting because that was the first time I was reporting to the board for my own company. And I got in there and, I spent some time in the lead up really thinking about how I was going to present. I got in there, I presented, and I know this is maybe it's a little humble brag. I don't mean it that way, but we get to the end of it, and the thing I remember most about it, and what really inspired me to have this conversation and to do this talk for you all today, was one of the board members who stopped me and he said, I think I can speak for everybody here when I say cybersecurity is the thing that keeps us up most at night. And for the first time, I actually feel comfortable that we've got somebody in place who's got this in hand. Then he went on to say, I've been on the board for 7 years, and that's the best presentation I've seen on this topic. Now, that's not me bragging on me. Yeah, it's great and wonderful, and I'm really excited because my boss was there to hear it, and so that went over really well. But no, the reason I tell you that is because, as I said, that was the inspiration, because I got to thinking, wait, you've been hearing from our CISO for years. Why now that a BISO, Business Information Security Officer, is in front of you, is this the best presentation you've ever heard? And I started really paying attention to what I was hearing from peers in the industry. And I started to become aware that, you know what? We've been fighting for a long time to get to the board, right? I can remember back in those 16 years, we've been talking about, there's been media articles, everything else about how the CISOs just don't get time in front of the board and how CISOs need to be there. We need to have more of that opportunity. And that goes for all of cybersecurity. And you know what? We're getting progress. I don't know how many of you saw this from the SEC, but the SEC is actually putting out guidance now that says cybersecurity needs to be a part of the boardroom discussion, that we need to have cybersecurity experts in the boardroom. But what I worry when I hear comments like that from board members, by the way, board members who had to ask me what a CISO was, okay? When I hear that, those presentations haven't been going so well and they haven't been getting that comfort level, it tells me we're not ready for this as cybersecurity folks in general, or at least that we have room to improve. So that's what really inspired this. And so as I said, I kind of took that to heart. It's important to me to analyze things like that. That's just kind of how I am. I overthink things. Anybody else in here one of those people who just kind of overthinks things? Probably most of the room, right? And, so I got to thinking, and I started really listening to what people were saying in the industry, and I realized there's a lot of really misguided things that I'm going to call myths. Now, I don't say that to be derogatory, but they're things that we've tried over the years. Things that a lot of times, many of these sayings and things have become cliche. And we've kind of accepted them as truths, but I don't think they're really true. And so I'm going to start there. And I want to really dig into some of these because I'm sure some of you have heard these. Some of you may subscribe to them. I've said them myself. So I'm not proclaiming innocence here. I'm proclaiming that I've given this a lot of thought, and I think there's a better way. So let's dive into these, because I think it has to start with understanding what I believe we're doing wrong today when we get in front of the board. So, anyone heard this? Never let a good crisis go to waste? What does that mean to you? To me, when I talk to people, it seems to mean that, hey, we just had a breach or something, so the pocketbooks are open and I can spend all the money. And we approach it that way, right? I mean, I've read articles on this. We saw this with past high-profile breaches in the industry where, hey, we had a big breach. We went out and spent a couple $1 million over the course of a year, 18 months, and then we just kind of forgot about cybersecurity. And shit, we got breached again. Shocking. But it's because we approach it like this. Now imagine you're in a breach. And imagine you go in there with this line from Mr. Mueller. Now, how many of you, and don't be shy because I will raise my hand too, have uttered these words or something similar before? It's not if, but when. Imagine going into your board and you say, or your executive leaders, and you say, you know what? It's not if we get breached, but when. Now, spend $2 million on that IAM solution so I can make sure we don't get breached. How effective is that? Now we wonder why they don't want to give us money. And that's the kind of thing that happens. We go in there and we've had a breach and we talk about, well, we need this and we need this and we need this. And it sets the stage that, well, we weren't doing these things right. And so once we fix them, then we'll be secure. And that's the narrative that we build when we go in there and we take that idea of don't let a good crisis go to waste, spend all the money now. Now, there are good ways to make use of a good crisis. I'm not going to lie, and we'll get to that. But going in there and just thinking that the crisis is your excuse to get funding and that's how you want to drive it, there might be better ways. Because as I'll share later, I've watched a CISO get fired for mishandling this. So our second myth, security is a risk management function. We've heard this one before, some of you. I see a few nodding heads. Really? Do we want to minimize what we do down to risk management? Is that all we do? I mean, risk management's responsible for a lot of things. If I look at this, risk management, what plays into business risk? There's a whole lot of different things here. If I think about the brick wall that is risk management, all those various bricks, cybersecurity is one little brick in that wall. I really hope we're delivering more than just risk management because that really kind of minimizes the value that we bring to an organization. And so when I'm in front of senior executive board level leaders and I say, you know what? Well, I manage risk. I've already got a risk management team that does that. You're just one little area of that. So clearly, cybersecurity is just a small component. If I've only got 10 people on my risk management team, why do you need 50 for cybersecurity? See how that logic works? That's what you're putting in it. Remember, these are people who don't do cybersecurity every day as their day job. To us, we understand why do I need 50 people when there's only 10 in risk management. But to them, when I say my job is risk management, I'm a risk management function, that's what I'm telling them. I'm just a small piece. But there's the whole other side. I hate Venn diagrams, by the way, but they tend to be useful sometimes. There's all the other stuff that we do that isn't risk management. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later, too. An offshoot. This one has come up more recently. So I hear a lot of CISOs, and I love that they talk about this, saying security's job is to enable the business. I love that. Unfortunately, when I ask them what that means, and you prod at that a little bit more, some of the answers that I'm hearing are a little less than inspiring. Because, you know, I mean, how does reducing risk enable the business? Think about this for a minute. Being in business, the actual inherent existence of being in business carries with it risk, right? If I'm going to start a business, big or small, whatever level I'm at, there is inherently risk just to being in business. There's all those different areas of risk, which means that by virtue of being in business, I have now accepted that risk as tolerable enough to stay in business. So if all that security does for me is reduce that risk that I've already said is acceptable, well, that's not very exciting. That kind of makes me question, why am I spending millions of dollars on a security program every year? The other problem here is, does anybody know the 4 ways you can manage risk? There's 4 techniques for managing risk. Do you know what they are? I know it's going to be hard to hear you. I think I heard them, and they're similar to what I've got. But yeah, you can avoid the risk, you can reduce the risk, you can accept the risk, or you can transfer it, right? Now, as security practitioners, those bottom 2 really get us fired up. No, don't risk accept everything. Okay, but don't transfer the risk. We hate cybersecurity insurance. Don't do that. That's not secure. All right. Well, I could avoid it, which means I could just shut down those applications that are high risk. How many business leaders do you think are going to support that idea of, hey, let's turn off that revenue generating thing because that cost center in security says we should do that? That's not such a popular option. So you're kind of left with reduce the risk. That's our only option here. That's all we bring to the table is that one component. Come on. We got to do more. We want to be more than just risk. All right, my last one. I'm harping on risk because we use this a lot. Oh, I love this one the most. The language of business is risk. Walk into your boardroom sometime and see how much they talk about risk. Is the language of business really risk? What's the language of risk? I see it back here. Yo, it's money, people. I'm not in business because I want to manage risk. I'm in getting business because I want to talk about risk management all day. I want to talk about how all these different threats are putting me at risk and all the horrible things that I have to be aware of every night. I'm going to be, oh my gosh, these things are going to keep me up at night. God, that's so exciting. Yes, I'm going to go and start my business. No. We get in business to make money. The language of business is money and the avenues for how we make it. That means innovation. That means new markets. That means expanding and getting more efficient and cutting costs, all the things that are going to put more revenue at the top line and indirectly put more net income at the bottom line. That's what the board cares about. All right? Because at the end of the day, they're there for the shareholders. They're there to make sure that business is doing the right things, to make money and to protect that money and to keep making more. Like it or not, we live in a capitalist society. That's where we're at. That's what we do. That's what business is all about. All right, let's move away from risk because I've beat up. There's probably some like risk management folks in here right now. Like, God, she just keeps harping on risk. Okay, we get it. Yeah, but there is more. The board needs metrics. Now, this isn't really a myth because it's not necessarily false. This is one of those where our application of the concept's a little off. How many of you have seen board presentations with dashboards like this? Ooh, look at all the pretty vulnerability colors. And wow, we patched all those different things. That's a pretty donut chart. Donut charts are horrible, by the way. Any of my accessibility experts in here, talk to them. They'll tell you why donut charts suck. Don't use donut charts. Ooh, hey, look at all that stuff we blocked with our DDoS filters. Yeah, that's exciting. You know when you find out how useless these metrics are? When the board member or your CEO or your CFO looks at you and says, yeah, but what does that mean? Yeah, no kidding. These are great metrics. We, in the security world, know what they mean, and they're great. To anyone outside of security, this is completely without context. It is completely meaningless. It does nothing to demonstrate that we're doing the right things or that we're, protecting the business. I mean, they look great, All right. Yeah, we did all that stuff. Is that good or bad? What do our competitors see? Well, I don't know. Yeah. Well, now your board is wondering, like, how competent are you really? You gave us some pretty pictures. We like those pretty pictures, but we got to do more. So metrics are great, and we'll come back to metrics too, because metrics can be a good thing. They are a necessary thing, but they need to be used in the right way. This one is a little more rare in the wording. Okay, I don't know that I actually hear people say this too often, but this is the approach, right? So the board needs to understand your projects. Hey, here's all the cool things I'm doing. I'm doing this, I'm installing this, I've got all these different vendors, we're using this and we're using this. And so we just bought this new EDR platform, but then we're going to move to XDR, and we bought this DDoS and package. And by the way, so we had to deploy microsegmentation, and so we implemented this tool, and now we're going to move to this next gen, whatever, whiz-bang, military grade, whatever crazy vendor product we're going to install next. And you know what your board members are doing? They're looking at their phones. Those are the kind of board meetings I've sat through. I've watched technology people go in there and talk for a half hour about all the cool technologies, and the board members aren't even paying attention anymore. They're gone. They're out. They're done. They've seen it. They're not interested because none of that means anything to them. When you go in there and you say, hey, we're deploying CrowdStrike on all of our workstations. Yeah, so what does that mean? They don't know. They don't care. They don't need to know. So telling them the what, that I'm doing all of this stuff, I can throw a bunch of logos on the screen, this doesn't tell them anything. We in security, when we walk into these high-level meetings, we are there to give them the information that they need in order to make decisions. At the end of the day, when I'm going to the board, I want them to understand my view of our security posture so they can make the decisions I want them to make. So in the spirit of the talk, in the spirit of being out here at Hacker Summer Camp, I'm a lifelong hacker. It's what I do. It's how I think about things. So it's time to start thinking like a hacker. There's got to be a better way. I want this system, the system being my executive and board leadership, to respond to me in the ways that I would like. Maybe not the ways that they're used to, maybe not the ways they're designed to. That's the reality. So, now if you read the abstract for this session today, I promised you some real-world examples. Then I changed jobs, so I can't really give you... You'll notice it's a little more redacted than I would have liked, but, I can't leverage some of those things because I don't work there anymore, and there's like, intellectual property constraints. They get kind of sensitive about that. I can't figure out why. But we're going to go through this, and we're going to look at this from the hacker's perspective. So put your hacker mindset on for a minute. You don't have to be a pen tester, you don't have to be a hacker, but just imagine looking at this problem the way a pen tester or a hacker might look at this. I want to manipulate my board. I want to win them over. I want to make them my friends. I want to make them stand up and say, I get it. How many people do you need on your team? How many do you have now? Let's get you more. Because that is something else I've heard from a board, and that is gold. So let's dive into this. All right, first and foremost, if you are going to any board or executive level meeting, you need to assess the perimeter, just like you would if you were a hacker. What are you going to do? You're going to go out there, you're going to do some passive scanning, you're going to be really quiet and subtle about it. Your board is no different. Get out there, understand who it is that you're going to be talking to. And when I say understand, don't just, okay, well, that's their name, that's their bio, that's on a website or something. Okay, that's great. Or, hey, yeah, I know all my executives. I know who they are, or I know my senior leadership. Look at their background. Where do they come from? People don't end up in board leadership positions because they're, cybersecurity experts or they're oblivious to running businesses. These are people who are running businesses elsewhere. They have a perspective on things, and that's something you can use to your advantage. Do they come from healthcare? If their day job is they're a CEO of a healthcare company and they serve on the board of your company that does something completely different, use that to your advantage. They understand the concepts of privacy because they're probably inundated with HIPAA talk all the time. So use that. Maybe you're not even in a regulated industry at all, but you can use that context to talk to them and help them understand it. Do they come from financial services? Same thing. They understand PCI regulations. They understand things like the SEC, the OCC, EIEIO. We can go through them all, right? All the regulators out there. You can leverage that information. Have they worked in pharma? Maybe they understand the complexities of being, going through compliance. All of these different things, understand where they come from. Because when you go into there and you understand the audience you're talking to, those are things that you're going to leverage. But you have to understand it so that you can. You can build that plan, but It's all about understanding where they came from, because that is what's going to tell you what are they thinking. Knowing and being able to predict what your board is thinking is crucially important. Because you want to plan your targets. All right, just like if I'm in a pen test, I go out there, first thing I do is I do that reconnaissance, right? I kind of assess the perimeter, I figure out where do I want to go first? What looks juicy? What looks interesting? What do I need to be prepared for? Where am I probably going to find some countermeasures that I'm going to need to evade? So I start to plan my targets accordingly. Well, it's the same thing when I go in front of the board. I want to know what is it that they want to know. They don't really want to know how many, denial of service attacks we blocked, or how many ransomware emails we caught in our email system, or how many people clicked on the phishing test. They ask those questions because that's what they hear. They hear it in the industry. They've probably seen it in their own companies. They've probably heard it from your predecessors or your peers. And so what are they really trying to assess? Well, they just want to know, are we secure? Are we safe from being breached? Now, that question in and of itself might be problematic to you. It should be. Because going back to that, it's not if but when, yeah, that's actually true. Nobody wants to stand up there and say, yes, we are ultimately secure and we cannot be breached. I mean, I would love to be able to say that, but you couldn't pay me enough to get me to say that. But that's what they're asking. They want to understand. They're looking for that comfort to say, all right, we're doing the right things. They also want to understand, are we spending the right money in the right places? Again, their job is to make sure the business is profitable. Whether we're talking executives, whether we're talking board members, they are there to make sure the money looks good. So if they're spending money on cybersecurity, they want to know that it is delivering as promised, that they're spending money in the right places, that at the end of the day, they're not going to be spending more money to clean up a breach, to do all the PR work following a breach, to deal with the reputational impacts that, believe it or not, do actually impact the business. And then finally, they just want to know, ultimately, should I be worried? What's out there that I need to be worried about? What are the things, if I've got a competent CISO and I trust my CISO, what's keeping them up at night? What are they worried about? Oh, my Lord.
We have a tradition here where the speaker is allowed to make an outrageous request. And we do our best to honor it, although sometimes we honor it in evil genie fashion. We had a request for a crown and scepter suitable for the Duchess of Hackington. Would you say we have delivered?
I would say you have most definitely delivered.
Please take your scepter. And will you permit me to...
Wow, even fits. Good job. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
I think we'll keep this for the rest of the presentation then. So for those of you, I don't know if you caught it at the beginning, when you send in a CFP submission to BSides, they ask you for any outrageous, crazy, request, a la like a bowl full of brown M&Ms or whatever, right? No other colors. So see, there you go, blue monkey. Yeah, I threw this out, and I guess they delivered. So here we are, and I've completely sidetracked, and I've completely lost my train of thought. I love it. All right, so we're talking about what the board really wants to know. Ultimately, they want that peace of mind. I shared that story with you intentionally because, that board member said, hey, you know what, cybersecurity is keeping us up at night. It's the thing that we're worried about, but you've given me comfort that I understand that somebody is watching out for us and they're doing the right things. And that's what your board wants to hear from you. That's what they want to hear from every leader that they talk to. When IT comes in there, they want to hear, are you doing the right things from a technology perspective to make sure that we're staying competitive? Are you doing the right things from a risk management perspective to deal with all that different business risk way beyond cybersecurity and make sure that we're doing the right things? When the business leaders come in, are you doing the right things to address market conditions? So when they hear from cybersecurity, they want to know at the end of the day that we've got it in hand, that we're competent, we know what we're doing, because that's their job. Their job is oversight over the business. So keep that focus. Remember that when you walk in there, you're not there to tell them about a bunch of stats that don't mean anything. You're there to make them comfortable. You're there to make them feel like you've got this in hand. You're also there to confidently explain to them where there are deficiencies that you need their help in getting addressed. Now, I mentioned that problematic idea of, are we secure enough? You'll also run into these questions when you walk into these conversations at those levels. So, when are we done spending on cybersecurity? Or when are we secure enough? Those are questions I've gotten. Those are questions I'm sure anybody who's been in a board presentation has heard. I'm sure many of you may have even heard those from, scary enough, your own cybersecurity leaders. My answer is really simple. Well, if technology stops evolving or we stop adopting new technology and new business lines, maybe we can kick back our feet a little bit and chill on cybersecurity. Not really true, but the fact of the matter is technology is never going to stop. We're not going to stop innovating because that would be the death of our company. So we need to flip that narrative. We need to manipulate the inputs we're providing to them. If they ask us for metrics and we go in and we hand them a dashboard like you saw up there earlier, we're just playing into that same narrative that allows them to think that at some point there's an end state to this. There's no end state. And if you're having a hard time messaging this to them, just point them to that business concept. Hey, you know what? We don't stop investing in new business. We don't stop exploring new markets that we can dive into. We don't stop changing our technology footprint to take advantage of new technologies and new features that will make us more profitable. So why would we do this? Why would we do that with cybersecurity? Cybersecurity is a part of your business too. It needs to keep evolving, keep growing, and keep getting stronger. And when you put that in that context for them, now it makes sense. Because that's something they can understand. They understand the evolution of business, how new markets are explored, and how that progresses. So use that to your advantage. That's where knowing your audience happens. Now, one of the things I remember from pen testing, my days when I did this, was how often pen testers would lose sight of the big picture. Even hackers. You'd get in there and you'd find something juicy and like that. This looks really, really cool. I'm going to dig into that. And you'd spend so much time on this one little thing that, looked like you might have an exploit. And maybe you finally successfully exploited, only to find out, you know what? It didn't really get you anywhere. Because you lost sight of the bigger picture. You weren't looking at the whole application or the whole network, or you weren't understanding the greater context of what it was that you were attacking in the first place. You got so hyper-focused on the ones and zeros of what came back from your Nessus scan, or that error message you got when you dumped a tick mark into a login field and you got all excited because, ooh, SQL error. Yay, SQL injection. Yes, yes, yes. We do the same thing when we go in and we talk about cybersecurity, especially when we get in and buried in those metrics. We don't want to look at metrics on a one-off. It's great to say, yeah, you know what? We closed 4,000 critical vulnerabilities this month. Hooray! So what does that mean? Well, I don't know. We still have, 2,000 open. All right, so you're telling me You fix 66% of them. What about the other 33%? And at the end of the day, it's meaningless. Why did we have 4,000 vulnerabilities? Why did we have 6,000 vulnerabilities that needed to be remediated in the first place? Where did they come from? Is that more or less than we had last month? Well, I don't know. Well, okay, I'll go look at that. I'll get you those numbers. All right, great. Did we do more releases? Did we do fewer releases? How fast are we introducing releases, and is that having a direct impact positively or negatively on our vulnerability counts? These are the kinds of questions they start to ask because they're natural questions, especially for somebody who is, used to the business numbers. So they're going to ask those questions when you start to put all those numbers in front of them without context. The fact of the matter is, when you're up there and you're telling them these things, you're not up there to tell them the what. So when we think about the projects, we think about our metrics, we're not there to say, this is what we're doing, this is what we did. It's not about the what, it's about the why. Why did we roll out CrowdStrike or Carbon Black or Vendor du Jour? Because I don't want to pretend like I'm endorsing somebody here. I'm really not. Why do we roll out that new MDR tool or EDR tool? Explain to them that reasoning. See the bigger picture and tell them why. Say, you know what? Hey, I'm looking at our overall cybersecurity posture right now, and we're in this really reactive state, which means we're doing a lot of really good things, but it's taking away from the business because, you know what? We're having to react. We're not being proactive. We're not ahead of the game. We've discovered vulnerabilities and then we close them. But we're not doing the right things to reduce the number of vulnerabilities. And you know what? That's having impact on the business. It means that our developers are spending more time fixing P1s out of their backlog than they're spending implementing new feature functionality. Now, maybe you don't have to get quite that deep, but they understand that idea of innovation is being slowed down because we're reactive. I want to bring our cybersecurity program up to this next level. I want to make us proactive because that's where we're sitting today at this reactive state. Now you're starting to show them where the business value is because, Alyssa's telling us she's going to make the business run better by improving our maturity in our cybersecurity program. That starts to speak to the language of business, the real language of business. All right, great. So I got in front of the board. I told them, hey, you know what? This is what I want to do. I want to get us from here to here. I'm going to drive all this business value. Great. But now what? I want to make sure they invite me back. Because you know what? That happens too. CISOs get in front of the board and they bore the crap out of the board and they never get asked back. Or when they do, the board is all set for them to be boring or doom and gloom. And these are, I'm literally quoting studies and articles you can find out there if you want to go digging. That's the way the board members often think of the CISO is, my God, they're always telling me how bad everything is. So I want to give them a reason to invite me back. So if I say, hey, you know what, this is our current maturity, this is where I want to get to, here's the elements that are going to get us there, and here's how we're going to get there. So rather than throwing a bunch of, here's my strategic program of 45 new initiatives that we're going to do in the next 3 years. Okay, how did you pick those? No, give them the roadmap. Well, hey, you know what? First, we're going to implement this new email security program. Then we're going to do some, I don't know, take your pick, what? Maybe security awareness training. And then on top of that, we're going to do some micro-segmentation. And that's going to move us from here to here in terms of our maturity for defending against phishing attacks that drive malware and ransomware. Malware, ransomware, they know those words. They hear those in the media. You just gave them 3 initiatives for them to invest in that tell them, hey, this is how that scary thing you're hearing about in the media with Colonial Pipeline getting breached or whoever else, this is how I'm fixing that for you. I have a plan. This is how I'm going to get there. They're comfortable because they feel like you have it in hand. They want you to keep coming back and telling them how's that going. And they want to invest in that because you're speaking to something that they're hearing every day. Roadmaps are a buzzword, okay? For many of those folks out there in the cybersecurity world who just want to focus on the tech, when we hear roadmaps, we cringe because it is a buzzword that gets used a lot, but they are actually important. This is the context where they are important. This is what a roadmap needs to be. To build off of this, I told you a story before that there was a CISO who got, in my opinion, now this is just my opinion, I think this CISO got fired, in part, not alone, because he failed to embrace this when he went in to make the most of a crisis. Company gets breached. CISO had a 3-year strategic program lined up. You know, he was doing all these different things, but they were all just, it was literally the laundry list of initiatives. And so when the company got breached, now they got breached, but they didn't have any real, like, material impact, as they would refer to it, because, well, you know, nothing ultimately ended up getting exposed. They caught it fairly early. You know, they had to do some things. It was a little bit impactful, but they stopped it. So what does he do? Well, never let a good crisis go to waste. He goes in front of the board and says, hey, here's all the things we found that we need to improve because of this crisis that we had. You know what the board asked him the first thing? How many of those items were in your strategic vision or in your strategic plan? Oh, none. Well, what did you just tell the board? You spent all that money, you invested all that stuff in me and the things I told you we need to do, and none of it had any impact. Because what he didn't do is he didn't go in there and focus on the things that were positive. Well, how were you able to detect it? Oh, yeah, because you know that MDR tool or that EDR tool we invested in? Hey, it actually alerted and we saw it quickly. You know that microsegmentation we invested in? We were able to shut off access across the network to limit the scope of where that ransomware got to. So when we talk about, you know, not letting a good crisis go to waste, use that crisis to reinforce how the things that you have done worked, how the controls that you did have in place helped. Even if ultimately you got breached and, man, you know what? They shut us down for a week. At least talk about where are those bright spots? What went well? What elements do you have in place to build on? Where was there something positive? Because otherwise, at the end of the day, you just look incompetent. And I'm convinced with this CISO that that is part of what drove him out of this organization. Because you can't go in there and talk to the board like that after a high-level breach and basically tell them that nothing that you've done in the last 3 years in your millions of dollar program actually helped. And then finally, we need to prioritize. So going back to the thing about the hacker mindset one more time, when I'm looking at exploits, I'm prioritizing for impact. I need to do the same when I'm thinking about how I'm going to enable a business. Now, if I really actually want to enable the business, good is if I can show some cost savings. I'm putting in and implementing something that's going to save us costs. It's going to make it easier for us. We're going to be more efficient. Great. Better, though, is if I can show how my item, my new initiative is going to let us tackle a wish list item. All right, that's wonderful, because now every IT organization, every technology organization in the world has those wish list items they can't get to. A great example of this I did in one organization, you know what? Aforementioned, I keep talking about EDR. I don't know why, but that just keeps coming up. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm so focused on EDR today. That's really bad. But no, we put in an EDR solution, and one of the things we looked at to justify it was, hey, you know, IT, what's frustrating you the most, or where are you spending most of your time? Where do you see an inefficiency? And it was rebuilding machines that were getting infected with malware. Now, this was, 5 years ago. Well, hey, if we put this EDR solution in and we're able to block that malware, that should free up your help desk people so that they're not rebuilding computers all the time, and they can do other things. And indeed, they were actually able to do that. They were able to invest in a wish list item that they had for deploying virtual I think it was AWS virtual workstations, because now they had the time to dedicate to it, because they weren't sitting there dealing with, having to rebuild these physical laptops all the time, because we were blocking that. The best is if you can show them how your initiative enables a new market. hey, you know what? We rolled out that IAM solution, so that means that product that we're selling, yeah, we could leverage that same IAM solution so we can federate authentication to your application to the customers so they can integrate with it with SSO. They're not dependent on us anymore. They can implement all of the things that they want to from their side. Their access reviews, everything else happen from their end. They're happy. Look, that's something new that makes your customers happy. That shows you understand the business and how your cybersecurity initiative can play into that. That is absolute solid gold when you go in front of anybody from the business side with a cybersecurity initiative. So, last 2 slides. Yeah, I'm counting slides, wow. So you get invited to go present to your ELT, your executive leadership team, or the board. What do you need to do? My suggestion, 3 slides. If you're making a presentation for the board, don't plan on presenting more than 3 slides. Now, you can have more slides that go into an appendix that have a bunch of metrics and other things, but focus on 3 slides. 3 things you should be giving them. And I took it off the screen. Talk about what's happened. What's happened since the last time you met? Give them that update. They're all going to want that. Then tell them where we are. These are the risks I'm seeing right now. These are the 3 or 4 top risks that I'm focused on. Almost every board and every ELT, they're going to ask you this. They want to understand, what's the top risk right now? Russia's going bonkers in Ukraine. Does that matter to us? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Ransomware, I'm hearing all about that. Do we care about that? Yes, we do. Put that in front of them, and then finally, tell them what you're going to do about it. Tell them the why. Tell them the story of, hey, you know what, we saw this. Here's what I'm worried about right now. Here's what we're going to fix to make sure that that's less of a risk for us. Finally, when you go into a board meeting, some things to be aware of. First and foremost, watch your time. Get the most important stuff that you can out as quickly as possible, because you know what? Just like Kanye, they are going to interrupt you. They are absolutely going to interrupt you, and because these are people who are used to, they're moving at the speed of light, just like we all are, and they may seem rude, but it's the way that they behave. They will interrupt you in the middle of your session, so get the most important stuff in front of them. How do they interrupt you? Well, they are going to come with every question imaginable, and some of these questions are going to be wild. You're going to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, we've been working with CISA to understand all these emerging threats and what we should be doing and, you know, what attacks are being exploited. And then they'll say something like, well, are you working with the NSA and DARPA on that too? We're not a defense contractor. We're not international, so I'm not really sure that NSA and DARPA have much applicability here. But those are the kinds of questions they're going to ask because they hear their peers talking about it. Okay? So you want to be prepared to answer those questions that sometimes are just not going to make any sense at all. You can't know every question they're going to ask, but be prepared to handle that on the fly, because they will stop you and they will ask some really interesting questions. At the end of the day, you're up there to educate them. You're there to make sure that they understand the cybersecurity posture of your organization so they can make decisions. Just remember this quote from Einstein: genius is making complex ideas simple. Don't go the other direction. Don't make simple stuff complex. Enough of this is complex as it is. So the magic slide, I always invite you to continue the conversation. If you've got questions or you think I'm full of crap, tell me in a nice way. If you wouldn't mind, that'd be best, but I'm more likely to respond if you do. But please reach out to me on social media. And then finally, big thank you to BSides for the crown and the scepter and having me up here. I mean, this is great. Thank you to my organization for, letting me be up here and talk about working for them and, giving me some time to get away from all the craziness going on there. And thank you to all of you for being here. So the big question now is, do we have any questions? Come on up.
Have you ever seen a more virus CEO because of a presentation by a CISO?
have I ever seen a board fire a CEO because of a presentation from the CISO? Not directly. However, I have seen hard questions asked when a CISO went and made a really poor presentation, where the CEO is now getting asked, or sometimes, the CTO or the CRO, depending on who that CISO reports into, they'll get some pretty hard questions. If a CISO walks into a board meeting and really drops the ball, yeah, I've seen hard questions come from that. And I'm sure sometimes that, CEO role is just as tenuous as any other when you're in front of the board. So, yeah. See, now we're getting ready for hot takes. Who do I think who should the CISO report to? So here comes the fence riding answer of it depends. I think it can work in a number of ways. Ideally, I would love to see the day where we get to CISOs reporting directly to the CEO or the CFO. Businesses aren't ready for that. It can work with the CISO reporting to the CIO. Ask me how I know. All right? It can. You can have CIOs or CTOs who are very into this and very much appreciate it and will give the space. But that has to be a working relationship that works. And generally that works best if it's a technology-driven company. If you're in an industry that's not technology-driven, that doesn't work so well. That's where you might want to look at something like maybe reporting into risk or reporting into, dare I say, audit. Not the greatest either. But because no matter where they report, honestly, other than to the CEO, there's always going to be that potential for conflict of interest. And so, yeah, there's not one magical answer I can say. I've seen it work and I've seen it fail in all particular configurations. So, take that for what it's worth. I wish I had a more definitive answer, but I don't. Last one. What would be my advice to handle the most unexpected question? This is a lesson to learn for all of life, right? Well, that's a really good question. Start there, because that gives you a few minutes to figure out how you're going to answer. I'll tell you the way not to answer is, that's a really good question. Are you freaking nuts? But what it does do is it gives you a second to say, or, that's a really interesting idea. You want to be complimentary, but sometimes you do just have to be direct and point out to them why it's not. That DARPA question, that's actually one I fielded. Okay, this board member asked me if I was working with DARPA. And I'm like, so my answer to her was, that's an interesting idea. In our space, we're really not, working with DOD or with the military, or, we're not even a federal contractor. So, we get more applicable information out of CISA than we would get out of DARPA, is kind of the way I approached it. And so, it's a way of saying, like, yeah, that's, there's legitimacy, because clearly she had heard that somewhere. She had a peer who said, we work with DARPA and get all this in. Yeah. No, we work with CISA because they're the ones that are focused on private sector and really trying to build that relationship. So, all right. Well, I think we are out of time. So thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it.